You're listening to the UnSafe Bible with Pastor Ken Brown.
Here's the thing. When leaders become overly enamored with their own sense of self-worth, and you mix in the sin nature and the fact that they have power, you got a recipe for disaster. This didn't begin in Israel, and it hasn't ended with Israel either. In business, in government, any place where leaders can quash accountability, this becomes a problem.
The quality of leadership can be thought of as a spectrum ranging from selflessness to selfishness. Great leaders often think of themselves last and put their employees, customers, team, or platoon first. In contrast to this, the worst leaders are often those who prioritize their own gain above others. Today, Pastor Ken teaches that if you want to become an amazing leader, the best way to do that is to adopt the servant leader characteristics of Jesus Christ and put others first. Well, let's join Pastor Ken in the book of Hosea, chapter 7, as he begins his message, Leaders Breaking Bad.
So one of the things we're going to talk about, because this is where we are in Hosea, we're in chapter 7, starting in verse 3, going to the end of the chapter. He starts talking, Hosea, speaking on behalf of the Lord and writing what the Lord would have him to say, starts talking about leaders. We're going to talk about leaders breaking bad. Or the legacy left behind by fallen, angelically inspired leadership. You have to remember that the unseen realm operates whispering in the ears of those who will listen to them. And many of them happen to be in political leadership and have been. And there are fallen angels who have been doing that for thousands of years. And guess what? Their tactics haven't changed. They're pretty much the same. Now, if you're like me, as we mature more, rather than get older, we find ourselves sometimes teaching our kids and then our grandkids, and we're teaching them the same lessons over and over and over again. And not once, but multiple times. Have you ever done that? I have. I've also been the recipient of that multiple times. It took more than once to tell me not to stick a knife into an outlet. But anyway, I finally got the message. But if you lived long enough, you'll find the same thing also reflected in the culture. No one seems to learn anything from one generation to the next. They just, you didn't do that. We're doing this. I'm going like, yeah, actually we did do that. Didn't work for us either. The teaching's taking place, but have you ever noticed that sometimes the learning just doesn't happen? Because we're all stubborn. We all want to do it our own way. For example, when I was growing up, we had just finished our involvement in a long, unpopular war, and everybody starts thinking of Vietnam. Of course, I'm saying Korea. But then we did Vietnam. And then did we learn from that? Well, no. We did Iraq, and then we did Afghanistan, and we don't learn. We just keep doing the same thing over and over again, thinking it's going to be a different solution next time. I love Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes. In chapter 1, he tells us this, starting in verse 9. What's happened before will happen again. What's been done before will be done again. There's nothing new in the whole world. Boy, did he nail it. Look, they say, here's something new. But no, it's all happened before. Long before we were born. And no one remembers what's happened in the past, and no one in days to come will remember what happens between now and then. And that's pretty much the case. In fact, I've noticed that people can't remember last week what they said the week before that, and this week they don't remember what they said last week. So it's amazing. So as we look at Hosea 7, we're going to encounter and see various actions that have been taken by unbelievers who are being misled by fallen divine beings, by fallen angels, all the different powers, principalities, you name it. They're misleading folks. They think they're the first ones with the ideas, just like our culture today. But what we'll find out is it's not new. These ideas aren't new. As we study the Bible, sometimes we tend to separate ourselves from the current culture. We study the Bible and we don't think about what's going on around us today, and I'm guilty of that. I've done that a lot. But the Word of God is current. We're going to find out it's very current, especially from Hosea's perspective, talking to the culture in Israel in 720 BC. The tactics being used by the fallen ones haven't really changed that whole much. The terms may be different, but the actions and the end point that they're going to are incredibly the same, and the path still leads to the same location, the pit. That's the goal of the fallen ones, to take as many to hell with them as they can. The intelligent evil that exists in the unseen realm, and we say Satan's the leader, and we've got all these fallen angels, and you name it. There's a listing that we see in the Bible of all the different job titles they have. They've been doing this for thousands of years. You think they got practice? Yeah, they've got several thousand years of practice. They know how to mislead somebody. They know how to maximize the number who follow them by misleading people. And their whole goal is to keep people away from the Lord. Nothing's new. That's what they've been doing since Genesis 3. So as we wrapped up last time, we were given insight that the Lord speaking about an ongoing investigation taking place into Israel and Judah. And there was more of a focus on Israel and what was going on there. And we learned an amazing thing about this. Every time Yahweh wants to bless Israel, he uncovers more sin, which prevents him from doing so. Now, this is a picture being drawn for us by Hosea, and we know that God knows everything, okay? So when you think about him doing an investigation and finding more sin, it seems kind of strange. What we're seeing here is a thing called an anthropomorphism. The Bible does this many times to help us understand who God is by explaining him in human terms. Because we're blinded. We're sinful. We don't sometimes get it. So he will explain it to us. And he talks in terms that are understandable to us. So an anthropomorphism is just simply describing what God's doing, his actions, his emotions, in human terms. God, of course, is invisible. He's infinite. He has no body. But we see human characteristics always. His strong right hand. Well, what right hand? He's a spirit. So we see this over and over in the Bible. It's to help us understand God, because we're not spirit beings. We're physical, and he wants the message to come to us and for us to understand it. So he is doing that for us. And verse 2, we saw, and they do not consider in their hearts that I remember all their wickedness. God remembers everything. And the beautiful thing is that when we give our life to Christ, he chooses to forget our sin. It's still there. It's still there, but it's covered up by the blood of Christ. Now their deeds surround them there before my face. So what God is saying is that he's not forgetting anything that Israel thinks he has. We know the future, though, that God has in store for his people. We've seen it. We know they're going to be regathered, and we know that's currently happening as prophesied, and we also know it's in unbelief. We see it. We know it's happening. But here what we're finding out is it seems like God's people have forgotten all about who it is that they're dealing with. They do not consider. Clearly, Yahweh loves Israel and Judah. He loves his people. But as we saw in verse 2 last time, there is a practical disbelief of God's omniscience and government that's at the bottom of all of the wickedness that they're dealing with. If God can't see it, well, then we can do it, even though he can see everything. Matthew Henry kind of pointed that out. He says, they may act like God can't see it. He does see it. They act like he can't hear it. He does hear it. And by the way, one of his names is jealous. So guys, you need to understand this. This is what he's trying to communicate to Israel. He's the judge of heaven and earth, and Jesus is going to be doing that. But Israel was trying to ignore that. If we understand who God is, and we know about his attributes, then this is just amazing that here you have a people who know that too, and they're ignoring it. They're calling themselves Jews. They're called by his name. They exist solely because of a miracle, because Abraham and Sarah weren't going to have a baby all on their own. Somebody had to do something. So it was because of a miracle that there is even a Jewish people, and yet now we see a serious sin problem with the people of Israel that leads to Yahweh making an opening statement here in verse 3 about the political leadership of the nation of Israel. The opening statement that he gives is one that also rings true today in our culture. It speaks to the leadership today as well as it spoke to the leadership of Israel. It talks to the leadership of business, of religion, and politics. What we find out is our culture is just as broken as the one in Israel. There's no difference. So verse 3, with their wickedness, they make the king happy, and the officials with their lies. Now, have we determined that the kings of Israel are corrupt? Yeah, I think we have. Uniformly corrupt and evil, all of them. Not one was a good guy. Every king in Israel was a vile king. All of them. Not one was considered godly. Not one was good. And that meant all the lower levels of leadership within the nation were busy trying to copy their boss. And if their boss is a crook, so are they. That's what got rewarded. That in turn, as we've seen, spilled into the false religion of the people. It impacted their business and personal relationships. There is a small remnant in Israel, but it's not very big. And the problem is that when we start looking around today, we find the same as we found then, that politicians and government officials survive by brute force. They did then, they did during the time of Rome, they did during the Middle Ages, they do today. They manipulate people, they look for public endorsement, they're constantly looking to how to manage the narrative to make sure that they have the most number of people behind them as possible. And the nation of Israel was no different, the king's there. The kings and the princes of Samaria are exactly the same. What works is right. Having been a manager, I always found it very interesting when I would move into a new position that the people who reported to me wanted to know what I liked so they could make sure that they pandered to that. In the Air Force, we used to say, do we know what the new commander likes? So we don't make sure that we don't do stuff that he doesn't like. The problem is that's not honest. That's not how we should be acting. We should be honest with the person, and that person should be honest with us. And then 9 times out of 10, whenever I took over a new position, I'd always say, look, it's okay for you to argue with me and disagree with me. I will not take you out and have you shot. It's okay. Well, the last commander said, I'm not going to do it, okay? And I didn't. You want honest opinion. You want to know people. You want to have people disagree with you. Otherwise, you won't. You think you're making a good decision. You're not. Well, the problem in Israel is nobody ever said anything negative. It's kind of like the moment somebody said something negative, they found out that there was going to be a headcount reduction in that position. And usually involved their head. Wickedness becomes a necessity. It becomes a virtue. And that's what's happening here. Kings and princes approve the results. And whatever it takes to get it done, that's what they're happy with that. So the king is corrupt. We already know that. Because why? He's pleased by corruption. That's what God's saying here. An existing weakness of all the kings is this. They're wicked. And the people, as long as they pander to that, they're okay. As long as they don't say something that the king doesn't want to hear, the people are all right. We haven't noticed that at all in our political surroundings today, have we? Not one bit. None of that goes on in Washington, D.C. I'm positive. Or in any business today. Yeah, it does, constantly. If the people are wicked, or even more than the king in Israel, everybody's happy. And why so many rulers in Israel? If you study the history of the kings in Israel, there's a lot of kings. I mean, give me a break. Well, the diagnosis is given to us by the Lord. They're wicked. just like the people. Everybody's scheming to get ahead. And if you're a lowly person trying to get ahead of the king, you're going to have to kill the king to get ahead of him. And that was going on. Promotion by assassination became a thing in Israel at the end of just before they were taken captive. Israel is an early example of a cancel culture on steroids. We've seen glimpses of that type of culture throughout history. When anybody stands up for the Lord in a culture that doesn't want people to stand up for the Lord, they tend to be canceled, eliminated, put off to the side. It was so bad at certain times in history that, John Wycliffe translated the Bible into English, published it, died, and then his enemies got control of the country. They dug up his bones and then burned them at the stake to make sure that he was not going. Really? That's a little much. But they were trying to cancel John Wycliffe. It didn't work. It didn't work at all. Whenever somebody stands up for the Lord, the world wants to cancel them because guess what? Who's in control of the world? Satan. And what does Satan want to do? He doesn't want the Lord to be referenced at all. So he does that. Now, before I go any further in this study, I've got to give you a warning. Any similarity in this study to current leaders, politicians, political parties, or anything in the culture is purely coincidental. And if you believe that, I got a bridge for sale. The diagnosis from the Lord, verse 3 to verse 7 of Hosea 7. With their wickedness, they make the king happy, and the officials with their lies. They're all adulterers. Like an oven heated, now this is an example, we'll unpack it, but like an oven heated by the baker who stops stoking the fire, from the time the dough is kneaded until it's leavened, on the day of our king, the officials become sick with the heat of wine. He stretched out his hand with scoffers, for their hearts are like an oven as they approach their plotting. Their anger smolders all night, and in the morning it burns like flaming fire, and all of them are hot like an oven, and they consume their rulers. All their kings have fallen. None of them call on me. Israel had a different standard than they were supposed to have. It is not about the shepherds taking care of the sheep anymore. Have you noticed in most Western cultures, it's not about the leaders taking care of the nations anymore. It's all about the acquisition and retention of power. That's what it was in Israel. That's what it was in Judah by the time Manasseh was killed, or died rather. And that's what it is in most of the cultures around the world. It's all about obtaining power and keeping it at all costs. The diagnosis, the thought then, is that one king after another in Israel comes to the throne through acts of wickedness and crime, through secret intrigue, faithlessness to fellow man. That's how they're getting into power. They're all adulterers. The king, the princes, the people, they all are. God says that. But it's interesting to see that they were obtaining power through acts of wickedness and crime. Leaders had no problem canceling you in Israel. None. Jeroboam the very first king in Israel, canceled the Levites. Said, you can't be priests. So they all left. They all went to Judah. After all, holiness just doesn't pay like sin does. Sin pays real well. By the way, a lot of other people left too. So, that's why there's not 10 lost tribes. Some of them all went south to Israel, from Israel to Judah. But here's the thing. When leaders become overly enamored with their own sense of self-worth, and you mix in the sin nature and the fact that they have power, you got a recipe for disaster. This didn't begin in Israel, and it hasn't ended with Israel either. In business, in government, any place where leaders can quash accountability, this becomes a problem. Lord Acton remarked to Bishop Mandel Creighton in 1887, Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Great men are almost always bad men. He's right. Those being led tend to either rebel or conform. The sin nature is strong. Jeremiah got it right. There's nothing good about any of us aside from Christ dying for us. That's the only thing that can change us. The sin nature, though, is if it's in control and you've got a leader who's pushing against that, they tend to have people who line up behind them who think the same way. The people of Israel had no problem going along with their leaders, canceling anybody who worshiped Yahweh. In Israel, they joined with the king in forcing believers to leave their jobs and their homes and move to Judah, where Yahweh worship was still politically correct. We see that in 2 Chronicles 11. The people of Israel went along with their leaders and blindly followed their lead by exchanging and engaging in changes to their lifestyle. They no longer followed what the Lord wanted them to do. They began to embrace prostitution and various sexual sins and the worship of the false gods of fertility, and participated in human sacrifice. See that in Jeremiah 19:5. Behavior that used to be abhorred and was illegal became accepted and was ultimately emulated by the leadership of Israel because they wanted to appease to their base. I'm not talking about Western culture, but it does sound like I am, doesn't it? I'm talking about Israel. When national leadership changes took place in Israel and a new king took power, it was usually accompanied by the entire prior administration and all leaders connected with that being kicked out. And in Israel, they were canceled with prejudice. They were put in prison. They had charges against them. They were trying to prevent them from having any meaningful jobs after they were kicked out of office. And in some cases, they were flat out killed and replaced. We see that in 1 Kings 15. Well, the jails began to fill up with political prisoners as well as those who worshiped Yahweh, who were included with part of that. And that's in 1 Kings 22. Oppression like this always results in deep political divisions. Have you noticed that? Just saying. Loyalties become divided. You got those who want to sin, and you got those who are saying, oh, we don't want to go that far. But in Israel, we see that in 1 Kings 16. The net result was violence increased in the nation. Don't know if that's going on here, but yeah, it is. There are those who didn't want to go further into sin. They wanted to stop it. They wanted to go back to Yahweh worship. But there are a lot more who, and those were the voices that were heard, they wanted to continue down that path. Because of the deep division that existed in Israel, you have a whole bunch of really bad kings come in, including one incredibly poor excuse for a king whose name was Ahab. Now, King Ahab supported everything that God was against. If God was for something, Ahab wasn't. And at times, looking at Ahab and studying him, he looked like he was nothing more than a puppet for his wife, Jezebel, as well as advisors. He really didn't have any original ideas. He was busy parroting whatever they wanted him to say.
The voice you just heard is that of Pastor Ken, here on the UnSafe Bible, as he's making his way through the Old Testament book of Hosea. This is one of many teachings in this book, and we trust that the words of Hosea will encourage you in your own walk of faith. Are you new to hearing the Word of God? Are you still trying to figure out this whole Jesus thing? You know what? That's okay. We all begin somewhere. Are you listening closely? Begin now. We are here for you and would like nothing better than to connect with you. All you have to do is go to our website, theunsafebible.com, and click on the Connect tab. Then click on the Connect card. There you'll find a form to fill out. This allows us to get in touch with you. We honestly look forward to speaking with you. If this feels a little overwhelming, we understand. Why not come see firsthand what we're all about? We'd love to have you at one of our services. All information can be found at the unsafebible.com. While you're there, be sure to look around. You can learn more about us and what we believe, or follow us on Facebook, X, and YouTube. There's also an archive of messages easily organized so that you can find whatever interests you rather quickly. Don't be shy. Stay a while and soak in God's Word. When you're done listening, would you prayerfully consider donating to this ministry? If so, just locate the Give tab to get started. Thank you so much for your support. Our time is up for today, but we hope you make plans to join us again here on the UnSafe Bible.